have been reading a book on family ministry by Dr. Michelle Anthony and Megan Marshman. And in a chapter titled Essential 6, God is Central, Marshman details how we ought to pattern our lives and our ministries in a way that gives space not just to know about God, but to know God. Here's how she puts it. She writes, quote, "Beyond information about God and inspiration toward Him, you and I need the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. We need God, the uncreated one. That is something I can't even fathom, and maybe that's the point. God is both beyond fathomable and utterly close. How do we respond? Time spent with that question and His presence is a recipe for transformation as He shares out of abundance what we need. God is both beyond fathomable and utterly close. How will we respond? Indeed, how will we respond? As is typical, the Psalms are an excellent guide here. King David is aware of this mystery that Marshman has articulated, of a God who is beyond fathomable and utterly close. In Psalm 145, verse 3, he sings that the Lord's greatness is unsearchable. And yet in 145, verse 18, he writes that the Lord is near to all who call on Him. God is unsearchable. He is beyond us, independent of us, separate from us. He Himself is the Holy of Holies, and before Him, all of us are helpless to stand on our own 2 feet. Our lives are like a breath, like a passing shadow compared to His eternality, and 10,000 years of unpacking His greatness would bring us no closer to fully knowing Him than the day we first began. And yet God is near to all who call on Him. He is utterly close. God delights in being known, in being related to by the people He made with fear and wonder. This can be seen in the Genesis accounts. It can be seen in God's dealings with Abraham and His dealings with the people of Israel. And it can be seen fully in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, in whom the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and who in that fullness came to dwell among us, and indeed in us, beyond fathomable, and yet utterly close. How will we respond? One response, perhaps our first response, is worship. Psalm 145 verse 1 says, "I will extol you, O my God and my King, and bless your name forever and ever." The God who tears the veil of His incomprehensibility in order to be known by us is the God who reveals Himself in the person of Jesus Christ and who is worthy of our highest honor and glory and praise for all of eternity. Another important response is prayer. God is near to us in order to commune with us, to be known by us, to have a relationship with us. And in Psalm 116, the psalmist's response to this nearness of God is prayer. The psalmist writes, "I love the Lord because He hears my voice and my prayer for mercy." Get this, because He bends down to listen, I will pray as long as I have breath. And that's from the New Living Translation. It is common, some of you have perhaps wondered this yourself, to ask why we ought to pray. Most of us know we should pray, we just aren't sure why. Some say because God answers prayer, which is undoubtedly true. Others say because prayer changes us. Right again. Prayer is transformative. In prayer, we learn to trust and confide in God, and we learn to love our neighbors by interceding for them. And these are all great answers. But this passage out of Psalm 116 offers a simpler answer. We pray because God listens. God, who is beyond fathomable in His unsearchable grace, is utterly near to us. He searches our hearts. He listens to us. And listening to us, He then answers us. Many of us know how wonderful it is to be listened to be heard, and how much of an act of grace that feels like. And here we discover that God, in His distance from us, nevertheless bends down to listen. How can we, knowing that about God, not respond by praying until we have run out of breath?